it'll show up at some point soon.
Before we go further, I think there's a lot of people who don't know anything about RAD Debugger or Ryan or other stuff. I know we jumped right into the printf controversy. We wanted the hot take, but maybe we can just take a sec. You can walk us back a little bit. You can talk about maybe RAD Debugger and give people some info of what's going on. Casey's mentioned it like 1,000 times on the channel, so I think we gotta tell people what it is. You know.
And is it Epic Game Debugger now, or is it still RAD Debugger?
It's called RAD Debugger, but that's sort of just historical. Epic bought RAD Game Tools back actually shortly before I joined, so I was never technically a part of like RAD proper. But Epic owns it now, but it's still called the RAD Debugger because I don't know. That's what they just, I don't know. Nobody's told me that it should be renamed, so I haven't renamed it. But yeah, I mean, basically, like the story of the project is. It started with what I said, like they wanted a viable, to my knowledge, I wasn't even near the company at this point, so
I was there if you want the actual story.
Yeah, maybe you should do the early, and then I can say what happened after.
Yeah. So what happened specifically was, and this'll just show you, remember the idea of the Steam, like the Steam PC, like Steam Linux? Do you remember this? Way back? Like way back. In like the early 2010s, they were like gonna ship this Steam Linux set-top box thing, and it never really materialized. Like some IHVs kind of did, but it never became a thing. And then like fast forward to today, and they redid like sort of a similar plan to that, and with similar people. Like I think Pierre Lou and those guys were same. I think it's like similar team. Did do the Steam Deck, and that has hit. Like, that worked, and they are going with it. But way back, there was this sort of idea that they were going to do a Steam Linux distribution. This is where it sort of actually started. Because, obviously, RAD does a lot of cross-platform stuff. They have to ship on Linux as well as Mac, as well as XXX. Like, in fact, when I worked at RAD, it was dizzying the platforms we support. Like, I'd build, the character animation system, and it's just a laundry list of platforms. It's like 14 long or something like that. So that was where I learned cross-platform programming, like, the hardest way, right? I had a little bit of experience before, but that was the big one. And so RAD and Valve were always historically very close. Like Jeff and Gabe, so the two heads of the companies, used to have lunch pretty regularly. So they were never like at each other's throats at all. They were not competitors really, or never thought of themselves that way because they didn't really operate in similar business spaces. So they were actually fairly close, and oftentimes they would even share employees sometimes. So there would be times, like for example, on the VR projects where some of the RAD people were still technically RAD employees, but like Valve would pay their salaries and they were at Valve. There was all kinds of stuff like that. So it was kind of closer than people know about because it's, there's not like this is secret or anything, but just like, it doesn't get written about or no one cares or whatever. So because that was a very like closely, they talked a lot. There was this idea because Valve really wanted to do Linux stuff, and there isn't great debugging tools that game developers are used to. And again, we also need a lot of specialized debugging tools for debugging things like 3D geometry and this sort of stuff. So we need things like GPU intervention stuff, and we need things like to be able to visualize vectors and all this other stuff that you might not need. So we need ways to add that too. So how are we going to get this stuff? And so what Gabe and Jeff decide is they're going to do a debugger project to get a good debugger going on Linux, and Valve's going to fund some of it, and RAD's going to fund some of it, and it's going to happen at the RAD offices. So they expanded the RAD offices. They added, there's like a new like area that got added on. They like grew and took over a little bit more of the floor. I assume people seem to like when I go on ridiculous story time, so I'm just telling the whole story. If this sucks, you can stop me at any point. You edit it out.
Okay.
It's great.
We love it.
Okay.
We love it, Casey.
Yeah.
So they
Leave
expanded
a comment on YouTube if you love
I
this.
love the BC. Yeah, I love the BC, and I can't wait for the AD coming up. So I'm
well,
super
Ryan will
stoked on
take
both
the
sides.
AD. We're going to hand it off, and then Ryan's going to do the AD. And so they had some people there, but it was always hard to get a team of people who actually would like get it to the point like where it needed to be, and largely that was because debuggers are kind of, I guess if I had to describe them, they straddle a really uncomfortable boundary. D's nuts jokes aside, the straddle is very uncomfortable for a lot of programmers if they're have to tackle it sort of holistically might be the way. or head head on, let's say. If they have to come at it from the front, then this straddle is very difficult.
I just have to say, Casey, you've been hanging out with us a lot, and I love this.
Okay. I feel like I'm allowed to say these sorts of things here, so I do.
Yes, it's a safe space. It's a safe space.
So, what I mean by that is it's a project that crosses between UI sort of like I need to know how to create visualizations and interactive things that show a lot of information in highly structured ways. If I had to rank programs by what is the hardest kind to write the front end for, it's actually Debugger. It is literally the hardest problem that I know of. If you wanted to see if a UI programmer is actually great or just kind of mediocre, have them try to do a debugger and see what you get out of it, right? Because it is I do not know of a harder problem that you would have to solve other than debugging, really, right?
Ryan agrees wholeheartedly. He's like, you're so right, Casey.
100%. Yeah, totally. 100%.
I mean, maybe you could argue that like 3D editor, like Blender, because it integrates the 3D part, like right. Those are the two that come to mind, and they each have kind of different stress points. Ryan decided to do both by adding 3D visualization to the debugger, so that's where he's at. But you have the hardest UI problem or close to the hardest UI problem on one side, and then you have like system level process control, register inspection, module loading, and disassembly on the other side, which is all ultra low level, right? So when you put those two together, it's really hard to find a group of people who can actually go from zero to debugger. It's really, really difficult. And so the project never really got off the ground because it just didn't have the right mix of people to actually make that happen. I'll spare the gory details of that. But
can I jump in for one quick second?
As many seconds as you want. It's your show, Prime.
No, it's our show. But
oh wow! Oh like my God! I'm feeling the love over here.
Thank you. One reason why I've historically keep using Vim and then integrating DAP, Debugger Adapter Protocol, and then not using it is because the Vim UI just does not feel currently kind of set up for debugger, because I do believe a debugger UI is a very visual experience. It is not like it's not just a separate buffers and text. There's more to it, and every time it just feels very clunky. So I agree with you. UIs are like super duper hard to be able to build.
Yes. And debugger UIs, because they have to marshal so much information, and the entire value of the debugger is can it allow you to edit that information display and update and present that information display as smoothly and as quickly as possible. Because there are plenty of debuggers. WinDBG would be a classic example of a debugger that has all the features under the hood and is largely completely unusable 99% of the time. Like, you will only fire it up if you need a feature that only it has, like time travel debugging. Otherwise, it's completely useless because the amount of time it will take you to actually set it up to do the debugging you want, you could have just done your printf, right? Like, it's the canonical example of what we were talking about at the beginning, where it's like anyone who was given only WinDBG and was like, I pretty much only use printf debugging, I'm like, yep, me too. Yep, like, absolutely, right? So, so anyway, the project kind of languished as a result of this. So really not much actual usable work happened between, that when it started in the early 2010s and later. Now, I tried to hire Ryan, full disclosure, out of college. Like, not when he finished college, but while I was in college. I was like, hey, do you want to come work on this? And he turned us down. So that didn't work out. So eventually,
you just wanted him to come on the pod to air the dirty laundry, Casey?
Yes.
Yeah, I love
and
this.
suck it, Ryan. We hate your guts.
Yeah.
We hate you.
I came later. I don't know what to
I love
say.
it. No, I was so
Linux.
delighted. I was super happy, but I was so unhappy then. I'm like, damn it. All right. I should have been more aggressive. But anyway, so we tried to hire Ryan and that didn't work out. But eventually it does work out. And not only do we get Ryan, but we got Nick, and we also got Alan Webster. So, like, three people I picked. And also, I mean, I guess Martin's never really went on that project, but he was another person I tried to hire and succeeded. So out of those four people that I tried to hire, we ended up getting all four. And through some combination of them, then they were basically able to reboot and successfully complete this project. and now it's like it's a totally usable debugger already, even though technically it's only an alpha, and they really haven't been working on it that long, because even though the project was very long, most of it was not actually usable. So anyway, Ryan can now pick it up from that sort of modern era. How did it happen?
Yeah, so I came on board in 2021, and I think Alan, I don't remember when Nick joined, but I think maybe Alan was slightly before Nick, but Alan and Nick showed up, and they were working on, Alan had inherited the project from Juan Chun, I believe. Yeah. And he had a bunch of stuff, and the thing about debuggers is that there's like 1,000 problems. Like, you have to know how to parse debug info formats, everything that Casey was talking about. Need to know how to do process control. Reading registers even is like more work than it might seem like it would be. And so they have
patching
all this
the binary too. Like, you have to be like patch the binary for breaks and data breakpoints and all this crap. It's huge.
Yep. Yeah, like even how to implement like line stepping is already like that's a deep rabbit hole already. There was a ton of work done in that direction, and then once Juan had left, Alan and Nick worked together on a bunch of the problems around. I think Alan was focusing mostly on the debugger stuff. Nick was working on. Nick is really good at like reverse engineering, like how the PDB format stores certain things, or how do you do unwinding, in this particular case, or all that sort of family of problems. Nick is really good at kind of drilling deep and figuring out how that actually works. So he was kind of working on that stuff. Alan was trying to work through the problem of like, how do you actually build an architecture for the actual debugger sort of engine, if you will. And then I joined, and my role initially was sort of like, I was helping with a bunch of the debug info parsing stuff, but I was going to build the UI. Like, that was the end goal. Like, I would be on the UI, like the front end side. Alan would be doing the engine. Nick would be doing like debug info format parsing, unwinding, like figuring that stuff out. And for a while we were just working on debug info parsing. So that was 2021, and maybe 6 months in or 8 months in, I switched over to building like a little prototype debugger just so I could like familiarize myself with the problem space. That has been like thrown away. So that's no longer in the code base, but it was just like a really crappy little like, let me figure out how you even do things like stepping. Like, how do you actually specify how a step is even supposed to happen? And then Alan worked, the last thing he worked on before he left was we also have a custom debug info format. So both PDB and Dwarf, one of the problems you have to deal with debuggers, especially one that tries to ship to both Windows and Linux, is you have to deal with like the situation of the different tool chains. One of the realities of that situation is that these two different tool chains use completely different debug info formats, both of which are extremely complicated, and they're very different in how they actually organize and slice information. And so we had kind of always talked, at least I'm sure they talked before I even got there, but while I was there also, we were talking about like, this debug info format problem is really difficult to deal with, actually. And so if we could actually move to our own format instead, and if you start with PDB and Dwarf, you can convert to our format and then build the debugger on that, and then it works everywhere. You don't have to deal with like an abstraction layer, for example, over incrementally parsing Dwarf or PDB. It gets really nasty really quick. We tried to do that, and then it turned out to be really complicated. And so the last thing Alan did was he designed the first version of that debug info format.
We should mention Alan's not there anymore, so that's why it's like the last thing he did, because he left shortly after that.
Yeah. So, and then at that point, once he left, I was building the UI for the debugger, and then I just sort of took over the pieces that he had written, and I either took them over, rewrote them, or they kind of like dissipated because it's just as the system evolves. If there was a layer that he wrote that I wasn't familiar with, I was like, I'm not really sure what to do with this, so I'll rewrite that part or whatever.
Understanding through replacement.
Yes, exactly. So I kind of, at that point, I took over most of the debugger stuff. Nick actually works on a linker. This is another very deep rabbit hole we could get into. So Nick works mostly on the linker, but he still does a bunch of he built the Dwarf format to our debug info format called RDI. He built that converter recently. It's still early, but he did like a first pass on it. So he's working on problems that overlap with the debugger, but he spent most of his time over the past like year or two, maybe a year and a half, on the linker. And then I've just been on the debugger. So, and I guess that's the story of the project. What it actually is it's a graphical debugger that you can debug your programs with.
Front down! What happened? I don't know. Did you push? On a Friday? Never! How are we gonna figure this out? How are we gonna figure this out?
Did I see your prods down? Do you guys need the wheel?
NeoVim config. That makes sense. I'm gonna spend a couple hours refactoring. I'll beat the plugins.
Don't guess where your issues are. You can see exactly where they are happening with Sentry. Get all the context you need to debug any problem because code breaks, so fix it faster with Sentry.